In this week's GTA 5 O'Clock, the complete character list so far, we speculate on Franklin's mysterious backstory and why the best GTA 5 revelations are yet to come. It's the only GTA 5 show that matters. It's GTA 5 O'Clock. Hi, welcome to this week's GTA 5 O'Clock. I'm Tim Weaver. I'm here with Dan Dawkins. Hello, Dan.
Hello there.
So this week, Dan, we're going to have a look at the cast of GTA 5. We're going to compare the characters we know and have confirmed with the original Hollywood casting calls, and we're going to come up with a definitive list of characters that we know are going to be in the game.
Yep, plus we're going to look at the screenshots that were released yesterday. As you know, we did a special episode with James. I'm sorry, Tim, you weren't here, so we had to cheat on you.
That's all right, I forgive you, Dan.
And we came up with some other things to say. James also said one of the most banal factoids in the history of the show, which, trust me, that's going some. But yeah, we're going to look back at the screenshot we missed, plus look at a few of your conspiracy theories. It's another good, regular, packed episode of GTA 5 O'Clock.
Okay, so as you referenced there, Dan, we missed a screenshot yesterday, which is very unlike us because we're normally so on the money. It was a shot of a Sabre GT burning down a freeway. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, that almost is all there is to say. There's a picture of like a yellow and purple Sabre GT. It's a car we've glimpsed previously in another screenshot driven by Trevor. In that case, it was like a perhaps less modded yellow version. And I think what we're seeing here really is like the extent of the customization. You can see from the spoiler fin at the back, the sort of the chrome, the tyres, it all seems pretty modded. The paintwork looks modded. Again, I just think it's showing off the extent of the modding. I think as well that you can pin the geography alongside the Sabre, and you can say that it looks like there's a railway line running along that shot.
Yep.
In the same way there was a railway line running along the other shot with Trevor, the yellow car shot. Otherwise, I have very little to add.
Okay, so one of the things you guys talked about on Monday was the bridge that Franklin was skydiving, base jumping off of, rather. You wanted to add a little bit more colour to that because we were talking off air about where that bridge might be located on the map, and you have. I mean, I suggested that it was the same map that same bridge rather that we saw in in the gameplay trailer when Trevor's belting across the water in his speedboat. But you had another theory. Yeah,
well, my initial reaction was the same as yours. As in, if you look at the structure of the bridge, it's incredibly similar to the one that we see in the gameplay trailer when Trevor's going across in the speedboat and we've got the radar on the bottom left. But what strikes me as weird is if you actually look at the scale of that bridge, it's quite low. And like even for a base jump, it just didn't look like a credible location to me for a base jump to get your shoot out and landing time. Plus, you'd be landing on like almost effectively water.
Yeah,
it just seemed like a weird decision. So, my speculation was like, even though this location is a better fit, I think, for the geography of the bridge and the location, a better fit for the architecture of the bridge. I wondered, there's a previous screen where you get to glimpse down like the valley in the northernmost river, which I think is near Mount Josiah, and you can see into the distance. It's like a stormy screenshot, should be on screen with you now, and there's a bridge glimpsed in that which is broadly a similar structure, as in it's that kind of archway shape with the supporting struts, but there's a lot more ground underneath it which would allow you potentially to perform a descent and get your parachute out. Now, I'm torn on this. I just think the only thing that's weird for me is that it's a really short space to parachute into for the one we'd originally said. Hey, if you know better, let us know in the comments or, get in touch on Twitter.
Okay, the only other things I thought I might quickly add was that the military helicopter we saw in that screenshot on Monday is probably an updated version of the cargo bob, which you probably remember, Dan, as being one of the helicopters you could steal from Area 69 in San Andreas. But with some difficulty, because I think when you went in, you got an instant 5-star wanted rating, I think, and they had surface-to-air missiles firing at you at the same time. And then I was just speculating. We've talked about it off air. I'm not sure you were convinced, but I was just speculating whether the condo shot of where Franklin was might be down by Vespucci Beach, only because on the left-hand side of that screenshot you can see a kind of skyscraper there, which I think is probably Los Santos' equivalent of the Sierra Towers in LA, which is kind of midway between Venice Beach, the real life Venice Beach, and the Hollywood Hills. And obviously in the background of the shot you can see the sort of beginnings of the outlines of the Vinewood Hills. Nicholas Davidoff on our Twitter feed also got in touch and asked, could Franklin's house be around the Vespucci Beach area? I don't know is the honest answer. I'm speculating, but of course there was that section in trailer 2 when Mike was sitting on a sort of bench outside in Vespucci Beach, presumably after having one of his therapy sessions, and Franklin and I believe Lamar came up to him and asked the direction to a house. Anyway, something to put out there, something to chew on. Let's move on, Dan.
Okay, now we're going to look at all the key players and characters from GTA 5 that are confirmed, and obviously some of these are pretty obvious, like Michael, but what we're going to do is add background. We're going to talk about who they're related to. We're going to talk about where they live. We're going to talk about how they were originally depicted when Rockstar did the original voice casting. So now there's the famous casting calls called the Rush casting call, which was leaked out onto the internet well over a year ago, and that featured like pen profiles of who each character would be. So what we're going to do is tie those pen profiles to the characters as we now know them, and that again lends credibility to the main casting list, and we can pick out the characters who maybe we can't place a face to yet.
Yeah, and try and build a picture of exactly who you'll be meeting and what sort of person they are.
Okay, well let's start with the big obvious one, Michael.
Okay, interesting first point, which is probably quite obvious, Dan, but it's worth mentioning, is that at no point during GTA 5's gestation or on any of the shows that we've done has Michael ever been referred to by his surname. So, because we just know him as Michael, don't we? I'm pretty sure that we don't ever get to hear his actual surname, which does play into our theory on the show that him and Trevor might be related, and maybe they don't want to give it away. Anyway, I only say that because every other character we know, main character, actually Franklin, we don't know what his surname is. Actually, I don't think either, do we? But we certainly know that Trevor's is Trevor Phillips. I just thought it was an interesting point.
Yeah, no, it's worth pointing out that his second name hasn't been pinned. I think that there's two reasons that could be. One is that yes, there is a relation to Trevor Phillips. Whether the Phillips itself is significant or I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's maybe it's not intentional at all.
Or whether it is in fact, as a lot of people have said in the past, could he actually be a returning character or a relation to a character from a previous game in the GTA series? So I mean, let's face it, if he was like Michael Vercetti, like alarm bells would be ringing. So again, I'm not saying that is the case, but it does seem worth noting that his second name hasn't been revealed.
Okay, so in the original casting calls, Dan, his name was Albert De Silva. We've talked a lot about the De Silva brothers and used them as a sort of jumping off point for a lot of the speculation on this show. Yeah,
I won't labour the point because it's been talked about a lot on previous shows. Basically, there was a casting call and the two characters were cast outside of the casting call. The two characters cast separately were Albert and Simon De Silva, which suggests that those two characters are perhaps have more significant roles in the plot. They were cast separately. Now, they didn't have direct pen descriptions, but we know about these characters through the casting of other characters in the main casting call. Now, there was a character called Kevin De Silva, who was 18. He says it's Albert's fat FPS playing gamer son, smokes a lot of weed, etc., etc. Well, that sounds a lot like Michael's son, who we definitely know plays Xbox. Jimmy, so that all ties in. And again, we know of Simon De Silva, that he's referred to using a character known as Nervous Jerry. And it says Nervous Jerry, 48, paranoiac, living in the sticks, which could be Blaine County. It says near Simon, which we're saying is Trevor, completely paranoid and terrified of Simon. So that ties up in terms of everything we know about someone would be scared of Trevor. Of course, he's a maniac, so you would be scared of him, and he lives in the sticks. So it sounds like the De Silvas were describing the same characters. It sounds like Michael, it sounds like Trevor, but the De Silva link we haven't put together yet. So that's the interesting bit we're positing. We'll see. But otherwise, we know some things like Michael's in his mid-40s. We know he's a retired and quite successful bank robber who's been moved out to Los Santos after striking a really unique sweetheart deal with the FIB. We also know that he's married to Amanda, but only married in the most sort of token sense because their marriage seems to be bitterly on the rocks. He's really unhappy. he's losing himself in whiskey and 80s action movies. You see him with his therapist, and he's clearly having problems with the duality of his character, and I think he wants to be out causing a ruckus, even though essentially he's a made man and shouldn't have any problems. But his kids hate him, his wife hates him. He's sort of caught in the sterile grip of multi-millionairedom, which I'm yet to suffer, and I'm open to the idea.
I wouldn't mind getting stuck in the sterile grip of millionairedom. I'd give it a go.
I throw myself unto ye, millionairedom. And again, his son Jimmy, we talked about. We've seen him getting involved in scrapes, doing bike rides with him. And Tracy, again, we've seen on the boat, as featured in yesterday's screenshots. Now, Michael is voiced by Ned Luke. I think this seems to be short of an absolute cast iron confirmation from Rockstar. This to me seems like a lock. Like, I'm pretty sure it's Ned Luke. Now, it's very crude, but Ned Luke looks an awful lot like Michael.
Yeah.
And as you'll see later on when we discuss the potential voice actor for Trevor, it could be a theme that, hey, the voice actors look like their characters, because let's face it, Ned Luke looks a lot like Michael. Okay,
so moving on then, Dan, to Trevor. Maybe Michael's brother, maybe not, but we know him as Simon De Silva in the original casting call, also in his 40s. What else do we know about him?
Well, we know he was a former aviator or military pilot. He's got that sort of military background. He lives in Sandy Shores, which again, is established, that's fact. Now, again, the casting call referred to Nervous Jerry, who is his friend who lives in the sticks. Well, we know there's a character in the game called Nervous Ron.
Yeah.
He's been identified in artwork and in previous trailers. He's the guy sort of by the fridge when they're talking together, and he's wearing that Manchester floppy hat. So we do know he's that character. Now the rumour is he's voiced by a guy called Stephen Ogg. Now what makes you think it's Stephen Ogg? I'll tell you what. If you do a Google image search, it's just like looking at Trevor.
He literally looks exactly like Trevor.
Again, that's a very crude, approximate way to pick the voices by, but he really looks like him. So to me, again, it's quite plausible.
Okay, next, Franklin, the third part of our 3-man GTA 5 team. What do we know about him?
We don't know who he is in the Rush casting call, as in there's no clear description that fits him. There is partially a character description that could work, which might hint at a potentially big plot twist that, again, we've talked about previously on the show. It's a character called Miguel Gonzalez, who's a young Mexican-American FBI agent caught between a few mob bosses, very clean cut. Now, I'm aware that Franklin isn't Mexican.
Yeah.
Doesn't look Mexican, but the age profile's roughly the same. And it says caught between a few mob bosses, and again, that's discussed in a previous show. There's hints that Franklin is caught sort of between worlds and between different allegiances, and it would be an interesting twist if Franklin is working with Trevor and Michael, but is in fact at the same time kind of an informant, kind of in with the FIB.
Well, we know from what Rockstar have confirmed previously that Franklin does actually work both sides of the law. I mean that's confirmed. So that's out there. That's definitely part of the game. So and we know that his boss, who we'll talk about later, Simeon Yatarian, is very involved. He's Armenian. He's very involved in the underworld and all that. He has a lot of contacts.
Yeah, and it says that he's caught between mob bosses as well. So there's definitely a sense of these characters potentially aligning. And so I guess the exciting implication is that Franklin reveals himself to be kind of like an inside man. That would be pretty interesting if that was to be the case.
Yeah.
Otherwise, well, we know he lives sort of in his original area is like South Los Santos, which I think is the area sort of southeast of the main downtown district. As we just discussed, maybe his house is actually somewhere else, because he's a guy who's he's on the up. He's repossessing cars, seems to be making good money. We've seen his girlfriend, who again we can't pin down from the casting call, but again she seems to be riding his ass pretty hard, and, striving to do different things. We know his friend Lamar, who's been seen in a number of the trailers, and he seems to be more caught in gang culture and sort of happy to stay in that world where Franklin's striving to do different things. We know his dog Chop, who's seen in all the screenshots, and we also know again Simeon Yatarian, who's his sort of Armenian bad guy would-be Fagin boss.
Do we know who's voicing him?
Well, the rumour is it's a guy called Sean Fontero. Now, applying our ridiculous law that every character must look like their in-game avatar, this is a slightly shakier fit because Sean Fontero's like a chunkier dude. Like he looks, Franklin would definitely be the better side of his physique. He looks lean and badass. So I'm less convinced on this, but again, that's what's been rumoured. It's gone through the internet, whisper mill. We're throwing it out there.
Okay. So those are the three main dudes. We've talked a little bit about Michael's family. Do you want to just run over those, Dan? We know that obviously he's married to Amanda. We just said that. Amanda is a bit of a naughty girl, Dan. She likes her yoga, but she also likes plenty else with her yoga.
Yeah, again, like Amanda dissatisfied. We know she goes out, spends all his money. It's insinuated that she's having multiple affairs. And, we were debating before the show came on here. It might be that she's having with it, two different guys at once, one of whom is probably the yoga teacher who we glimpse wearing the sort of the Tao t-shirt with the symbols on it, because we see Michael whack a tray over his head at a cafe in one of the previous trailers. But it could also be that she's having it off with Mr. Didier Saxpants, who's in, which trailer is he in, can you remember?
He's in Michael's trailer, I think.
Yeah, and we were again discussing off air whether they were the same person. Like the haircut and the face structure is broadly the same, but the yoga instructor is barefoot, has a necklace and an ankle bracelet, but the other bloke is wearing socks and pants. Now, what would seem strange is if they're related scenes, it would be a really kinky sexual practice if you were to take off your yoga gear, your necklace and your ankle bracelet, strip to your pants and then put on socks. That to me is I don't know, maybe people put on ankle socks for sex, but that doesn't seem to me to be an entirely normal thing.
No.
So I would suggest that probably she's involved with two guys and
they're two separate characters in the game.
Yeah, and Michael's essentially incredibly paranoid with good reason.
Yeah.
There we go. So I think that's kind of what you can say about Amanda. She's clearly quite a prickly character.
Yeah.
Plays tennis, yoga, she's spending his cash, living the good life. Things aren't good in the garden. Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy's his son. What we don't know tons about Jimmy other than he's pretty fat, he's pretty lazy, he loves playing video games, and he's also likes to drop a few race bombs online.
Well, again, we think from the original casting call, this is Kevin De Silva, who's described as Albert's fat FPS playing gamer son, smokes a lot of weed, has anxiety issues and a card for a bad back, very soft, very opinionated, into making racist comments while playing online. Again, it looks like the character's slightly changed. I think he's been given a bit more of a hard edge. He doesn't look like he's such sort of like a weakling, but he's still I think in the thrall of sort of entitled delusion. And again, we debated on previous shows that tattoo on his neck. Did it say entitled or whatever it said? And you look at the bands he's into. He's clearly like a sort of classic disaffected West Coast team who gets involved with scrapes that are a little bit above his station. So yeah, that's essentially what we know of his character. And I think again he's going to be integral to the plot in more ways than one.
And then Tracy finally to complete the circle of happiness.
Tracy. Well, again, Tracy clearly hates her dad. The first time she's glimpsed, according to the Game Informer preview of the game, is she's playing a dance game on the computer.
Yeah.
She's shouting him down. Again, we hear her shout, "I hate you," which is pretty explicit. So they're not having a great time. Again, she's clearly escaping from the family situation. We see her boozing it up on the boat.
Yeah.
Again, the new boat shown in the screenshots yesterday.
She's also, I would suggest, in a relationship with someone her parents don't approve of. I think it's in the second trailer that Amanda says to her, he's not coming in here, he's a bum, or whatever it is exactly she says. So it could be one of those guys, as you mentioned, on the boat, that are passing around a joint and having a few bottles of pisswasser. But yeah, anyway, happy families.
Yeah.
So in the world of Franklin, we know that he's single, or no, sorry, he's got a girlfriend who we don't really know that much about. We know he's got a friend called Lamar.
Yeah, Lamar's one of Franklin's best friends. He looks like he's involved in sort of Grove Street. He wears the colours. He's a classic gang member. Previous descriptions have described him as crazy. He says he has opposing ideals with Franklin. It looks like, again, they're at a tension point where their relationship could be fracturing. Again, that could have plot implications where perhaps they split. You can tell how that will move really as things develop.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the world of Trevor. He's got... there's quite a few people that are sort of in and around his world, one of which we know is Nervous Ron. We've just talked about him a little bit, but he's like a sort of paranoid conspiracy theorist living in, we're assuming, Sandy Shores, close to Trevor.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear. So he's been identified now, so it's official, like he is Nervous Ron or Ron. And, all I would think about his character is, it's interesting, is if you've got a character who's obsessed with conspiracy theories, he might be a nice character to give you side missions such as, hey, I've heard Area 51's out here, or Bigfoot's up near Mount Chiliad, I'm telling you, you've got to go and find him. Or, again, he could be a guy who says you've got to search this rare animal scalp. He might be someone who's got links to the more weird side of the game.
That's a really good shout, actually. Yeah.
So we don't know that, but I mean, that's a speculation.
He's also friendly with a guy called Floyd. I think Floyd's his confirmed name. Who is Floyd, Dan?
Yeah, we see Floyd twice. We have seen him where he lives in a flat 7611, which again looks like it's in sort of Blaine County area. And in that, when we were introducing, this is in Trevor's trailer, he's wearing like a security overalls, like he works on the road or something, or he's involved in construction. So again, he's like a sort of late 20s, early 30s dude. Sort of sounds a bit simple or a bit...
Yeah, he's got a little bit of like a little bit of a funny way of talking.
Yeah, but we see him again. It isn't immediately obvious, but we see him at the end of the same trailer.
Yeah.
And they're in his flat, and Trevor makes the crack about, sexual organ.
Yeah.
And various different things.
Do you want me to flop out my sexual organ again?
Yeah. So they're the same guy, and it seems to have been pinned that is in fact Floyd.
What's interesting is that, looking at that shot of him outside flat 7611, it looks, we assume, like somewhere in Blaine, out in the sticks in Blaine County. But when he's back at the end of that trailer, back in Floyd's company at the end of that trailer, it looks more like it's in Los Santos.
Yeah, do you know, I think you could actually be right. I might have spoken out of turn. I think that it's probably more likely that's like a more run-down flat in an area of like Venice or near the beach. Because when you look out the window of his flat, it does look more like that kind of area. So again, it's just the way the trailers are cut can be a bit misleading.
Okay, and then finally, Brad. Tell us about Brad, Dan.
Yeah, well, Brad is alluded to in the Game Informer first reveal of GTA 5. And now we know that Trevor agrees to take part in the FIB mission that, with the abseiling that was quite famously documented now. Because if the Fib agree to spring his friend Brad from prison.
Yeah.
Now, Brad has been pinned by a number of GTA 5 sites as being the guy who they escaped when they abseil.
Yeah.
The guy with the sort of cornrow effect hair, and
it's the guy who Michael, when they go to the FIB building, they smash in, and Michael's got him at gunpoint with his arm around his neck.
Yeah, and again, he's referred to in different things as a communications and security camera expert. So there's a logic in them springing him out if he's useful to them in terms of planning a heist.
Yeah.
What doesn't quite tie up is if he is actually one of Trevor's friends, and people have said that he's also the guy who Trevor electrocutes. What a great friend Trevor is.
Yeah, we sort of speculated off air as we were prepping the show whether it might be that maybe Trevor's reasons for wanting to get Brad out of the FIB are not completely crystal clear. Maybe he wants Brad out of the FIB so that he can torture some information out of him, or maybe Brad has got information that's very sensitive to Trevor personally, so he has some sort of personal investment in the information that Brad has. So maybe when he persuades Michael or the FIB or whoever it is he's not going to persuade the FIB because they're breaking in the FIB building, but maybe when he persuades Michael to help him, he's not being completely honest with Michael. I don't know. It's a theory.
It is completely possible.
So I think that's a list of confirmed characters, Dan, but there are a lot of other characters from previous casting calls. I think there were 3 casting calls. The Rush one we've referenced a lot on this show is probably the most famous. Do you want to talk about some of those characters in there and maybe...
There's one who effectively is confirmed, and that's like Simeon Yatirian, who's the Armenian car dealer who employs Franklin.
Yeah.
Now again, there was a character in the casting call called Harat Vartanian. He almost sounds exactly the same, you know. They only very slightly changed that. He was 42 to 52 years old, Armenian car dealer, moneylender, would-be fagging and would-be bully. That ties up with everything we've seen of him, where he's telling Franklin off in that trailer as well. You see that. It's just heavily connected to the underworld, but irritates people so much no one likes him. It just, that is that character.
Yeah.
And again, the more characters that are like ticked off as correct in the original Rush casting call, the more I'm likely to believe that all these characters are going to bubble out of the woodwork at some stage or another.
Yeah. So we talked earlier, Dan, about the character who was maybe teaching Amanda yoga, maybe teaching Amanda a few other things as well. I think in the original Rush casting call, he was called Brother Adam.
Yeah, his character called Brother Adam. He says he's a Welsh monk / cult leader / yoga teacher.
That's quite the mix-up.
Now again, cult leader would tie in, I think, with the Epsilon project and a character called Chris Fromage.
Yeah.
But again, it's hard to say whether it's separate. There hasn't been much Welsh vibe coming out of the Epsilon project for me, so I don't know about that. And he says he's 50, very live, very into exploring your personal tension through gripping massage, needs a Welsh accent. Now, it depends on who we're pinning this is, and we haven't heard the yoga guy speak, so it could be that he's Welsh. Now, in fact, what it's worth pointing out, as we were just discussing then, is that, we saw Pants Man. We said Pants Man might be another of Amanda's lovers, but it could also be that it's one of Tracy's lovers.
Yeah,
it could in fact
that's a
be
good shout.
The guy who's a bum. So, again, it's hard to say exactly. So, yeah, so that's Yoga Man.
Okay.
Ticked off.
Yoga Man's ticked off the list. You ticked off the list. You mentioned just now Chris Fromage, leader of the Epsilon program. We don't really know that much about him. He could be the Brother Adam character in the casting call. It could be someone completely different. But that's another confirmed character. And then there's a character called Mrs. Bell. Dan, do you want to talk about Mrs. Bell? She's, I should say, Mrs. Bell in the original casting call. She's not necessarily called that in game. She might not.
Mrs. Bell in the casting call is a swinger and a mellow Californian divorcee, 45, ugly but comfortable with self. Now, we've debated this, and this is purely based on the fact that this woman isn't that good looking, so this is really terrible of us. There's like the not especially good looking woman, I'm sorry if I've said it, who hands out what looks like the Mad Dog style missions to Trevor. But something about this doesn't sit with me, because whilst she's undeniably not a supermodel, like at the same time, she doesn't strike me as like a swinger and a mellow California divorcee. She looks more like a highly strung, tough lady from Blaine County. So, and we also know from the casting call that Mrs. Bell lives near Mrs. Avery, and Mrs. Avery is described as a neurotic soccer mom, homemaker, 48, anxious and addled on painkillers, very angry at neighbour Mrs. Bell. But the idea of like a neurotic soccer mum and homemaker says to me sort of Desperate Housewives, suburbs, more like this sort of area, Rockford Hills. Something doesn't quite tie up for me there, so I'm not convinced that the lady giving out missions to Trevor is in fact Mrs. Bell. But hey, we're throwing it out there.
Okay, what about the character in the Rush casting call called Ira Bernstein, Dan? I mean, do we know where she might fit into the trailers and the screenshots we've already seen?
Well, interesting thing, Ira is a man.
Oh.
Now, I again would have also said a lady, but...
Apologies to anyone out there who's called Ira.
Apologies, Iris. Yeah, in the casting call, Ira is 56, a publicist for an actress known as America's Newest Sweetheart, who just so happens to love animals, orphans, drugs and sex. And it says he's always trying to hide her latest indiscretion.
Ah, right, okay.
So it's there we go. But
I wonder who they could be talking about there, Dan.
Well, again, joining the dots, there's the character who's appeared repeatedly, the sort of Lindsay Lohan lookalike. She was in the key artwork wearing the Love Fist top, being, handcuffed by the Michelle Rodriguez lookalike copper. Now, is that Lacey Jonas, who we got in the car with? Or do we think it's someone different?
I think there's a good chance it might be. I mean, because when we went to see the demo, Rockstar did say to us that wouldn't be the only time that you came across Lacey Jonas. Now, I don't know whether they meant directly, whether you'd be involved in the mission, or whether you just like see her on the in-game TV and see her on advertising and all that kind of stuff. But I think it would make sense for her to be that woman we've seen in those pieces of artwork, and we certainly saw her in the demo.
Yeah, and I think now we're getting down to like super fringe characters. Like we just talked about Lacey Jonas. We also know there's Pamela Drake.
Yes.
Who's like a washed-up Hollywood actress, sort of a bit older, who we met on the street corner in like Vinewood.
Vinewood Boulevard area, yeah.
Yeah, and there's other characters who, again, I don't know if they're big players. Like there's the oddball character wearing the sort of Republican outfit who seems like a bit of a nut bar. Waving a placard. I don't think he's that significant. You don't know. Again, maybe a side mission guy. There's a guy who appears chiding Franklin in the hood, like a sort of younger, more athletic guy. Again, we don't know who he is. There's also a lady who's disrespecting Franklin. Looks sort of more like 40s, wearing a hoodie top. Again, we're not sure of her significance. I can't pin her to anyone necessarily in the casting call. And I feel like, essentially, that's all key characters.
Did we mention Jerry Cole, Dan?
No, because I've forgotten a key player, Jerry Cole. Yeah, Jerry Cole is described as 53, a disabled IT expert and criminal information vendor. People, including us, have speculated that is the character who's talking through the heist in the gameplay trailer. And he's a guy because he's carrying a cane. He's a balding guy. And he seems to fit the profile of being like a disabled guy. Yeah. And again, it would make sense if he's an information vendor, he'd be handing out a heist.
Yeah.
So that sort of ties up for me.
Okay, so those are all the characters. If we've missed some, please do let us know in the comments below, and please speculate on how you think they might be involved in the story and where they might fit. Dan, I've got a couple of quick questions for you, and then you can go off and sit on your sunbed for the evening. Mr. L on our Twitter feed got in touch and said, do you think all the game's vehicles will be able to be customised? Push bikes, helicopters, boats, etc.
I don't know about push bikes. I don't know. I can't remember when they spoke to us what they said about it, but it seems pretty extensive. I think, and we also debated on a previous show, like the level of customisation it might be possible to do with a plane. And like Rockstar were less forthcoming about that. So I think, let's just say all vehicles, the key four-wheel vehicles will be. I think it will be limited with the more esoteric vehicles.
Okay, and Gavin Fitzgerald on YouTube said, do you know if there will be a save function where you can save outside of a safe house, i.e. saving, I guess he means like saving at any point you want to. We don't know that, to be honest, no. But, I mean, what's the historical evidence?
I would think that, if you were mid-mission, even if it's a side mission and you sort of turn the machine off, you probably lose your progress. But I'd have thought that by and large, like you would be saving in between key landmarks. Rockstar have got much better at like adopting the procedures used in other games. Like for a long time, they insisted on making you physically drive to missions, and again that was rectified with like the quick trip in the taxi. And I think even again, if you failed so many times, you could just sort of quick skip. I think they just realised that stuff was really annoying. So I think they'll want to make it in tune with the way modern games are as much as possible.
Okay, and finally, a theory sent in by Mobius7 on our YouTube page. He said, I still think that the most dramatic parts of the map won't have been seen yet. Rockstar are being very canny about showing us a relatively small area of it from lots of different angles in all these screen grabs. The snow vehicles that were in the Max Payne 3 leaked vehicle list, which we've talked about on a previous show, have yet to be accounted for. I think there's snowy mountains much higher up where these will probably come into play. Now, the reason I mention that is because off air we were talking about how, or at least I mentioned to you that as we go through the trailers every week, trying to tie things up, you actually realise how sort of relatively few missions and few set pieces they are actually using. So there may be something in that.
Yeah, I think it's quite deliberate, and Rockstar have gone on record and said this, is that they don't want to spoil the game for you, because the truth is we live in a world of infinite spoilers. The minute a game comes out, people are online trolling it, talking about the ending. You look at the way trailers are released, and a lot of trailers for movies get released, and all the good bits are in the trailer, and then you get to see the film and you go, well, I might have enjoyed that if I hadn't already seen and ticked off all the good bits and knew exactly where they appeared in the film. Rockstar are great at giving you what looks like a big glimpse and an idea, and I think that's where internally they've probably wrestled with, because everyone was sort of saying, why won't you show us gameplay, why won't you show us more footage. I think they're kind of in an internal quandary of, we do want to share that footage with everyone, but we don't want to ruin the experience for you. And because we as gamers are our own worst enemy, and that we want something. It's that classic idea of being a child, and you think you want to find the Christmas parents that your parents have hidden, and then when you've got them, you get this little wash of sadness, and you go, I've just ruined Christmas for myself. And then and there's no going back from that point. So. No. I think Rockstar are in a tension, between show and tell and give. I think there's a lot of secrets left to show. There's a lot of secrets, and it might be that during the course of this show we've revealed more than perhaps you'd have found out normally, because hey, our job has been tracking the game, and we're speculating about a lot of stuff, and it will be fun to go through the history of GTA 5 O'Clock and tick off our biggest predictive wins and fails after release.
Okay, so that's this week's show. Thank you for listening. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of the show. Dan, did you want to add something?
Well, all I was going to say is that Rockstar added on their newswire that there's going to be more information in August.
They did say August, yeah.
All I can say is, Tim, it's a good job we had our holiday early.
Whew, that was a good job, Dan. Really, really good job. So thanks for listening this week. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.